Days ahead of the NATO summit in Brussels, US President Joe Biden has met NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg in Washington D.C. The focus of the discussion was on strengthening NATO. The US President Joe Biden vowed to rebuild relations with allies after 4 rocky years under former President Donald Trump. Remember, Donald Trump pulled Washington out of several multinational and multilateral institutions and threatened at one point to even quit NATO. The talks were focused on growing threat from Russia and China, global terrorism, cyber threats, and climate change were also discussed by the two leaders.
Well, China is also an issue that was addressed during the meeting with the president. It will also be an issue that is addressed when the NATO leaders meet next Monday. And what we see is that, of course, the rise of China poses some opportunities for our economies for trade, and we need to talk to China on issues like, and engage with China on issues like climate change and arms control. At the same time, China will soon have the biggest economy in the world. They already have the second largest defense budget, the biggest navy. So we need to stand up for the rules-based international order, and we need to work more closely with partners, including in the Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan, and I expect this will be an issue that will be addressed at the.
Stoltenberg also welcomed Biden's highly anticipated summit with Russia's Vladimir Putin and has said that NATO agrees with Biden's approach towards Russia.
Dialogue with Russia is not a sign of weakness. We are strong, we are united, and then we can talk to Russia, and we need to talk to Russia. Partly to strive for a better relationship, but even if we don't believe in a better relationship with Russia, we need to manage a difficult relationship with Russia. Arms control, transparency, risk reductions, all of these issues are important.
Earlier, the NATO Secretary General met US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Pentagon. They spoke about facing global challenges together. As the global balance of power is shifting, discussion pertained to the NATO 2030 agenda involving continued defense investment and the further strengthening of deterrence and defense. Joining us on this broadcast now is WION correspondent Kate Fisher, who's joining us from Washington D.C. Kate, obviously, the agenda for the meeting between Biden and Putin is already set, isn't it? And this meeting comes at a time when arguably the relations between the United States and Russia are at their lowest point in years.
Yeah, that's right. They are. The Russian leader can no longer benefit from the somewhat cozy relationship he had with the US president when Donald Trump was in the Oval Office. Mr. Trump did not really ever criticize Vladimir Putin, despite various admissions of his own intelligence service saying that the Russian government had interfered in the US election and various other issues. But now with Joe Biden, it's a much tougher America that the Russian president has to face. In the first interview that Joe Biden did as president, he described Vladimir Putin as a killer. And we've just had, in the last couple of weeks here in the US, a large cyber attack on an oil pipeline here, which stopped oil being delivered to much of the East Coast and caused big runs on petrol stations, although the US government has not blamed Vladimir Putin and the Russian government in particular. They do say that these ransomware attackers are based in Russia, and that's another thing that he's going to raise with Vladimir Putin when he has this meeting. And certainly the meeting he had today with Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, gave him a kind of foundation ahead of the meeting with Putin. He is able to get his ducks in a row, if you like, make sure that him and NATO are on the same page as he goes into that meeting, because of course Vladimir Putin, very negative about NATO, does not like the fact that he has this large defence force on his border.
Absolutely, and Vladimir Putin has said before the meeting, isn't it, that he isn't expecting any breakthroughs from this summit. However, it will open the dialogue between US and Russian leadership once again. But Russia is not the only point of concern as far as NATO and US are concerned. China is an equal equally big issue. Now, I'll just read out a quote by Stoltenberg. He says, I quote, "China will soon have the biggest economy in the world. They already have the second largest defense budget, the biggest navy. They are investing heavily in advanced military capabilities, and they don't share our values, Kate." So China also likely to figure largely in those NATO discussions in a few days.
Absolutely. That was a big part of the discussions with Joe Biden in the Oval Office today. China clearly a big threat to the US and to the rest of the West and Europe. And this was Jens Stoltenberg acknowledging that and saying, yes, they will be the biggest economy. They are a force to be reckoned with. But he also made it clear that they were not just an adversary, in fact, that they were a partner and they should be a partner, and that that NATO and the US need to work with China, specifically on things like climate change and arms control, and that we could not just, that NATO could not just treat China as an adversary, but also needed to treat them as a partner. The difficulties, of course, come, and he put this in very stark language, they do not share our values, which is clearly a difficulty. And he mentioned things like the Chinese government's treatment of the minority Muslim Uyghur population, the way they have dealt with democratic protesters in Hong Kong, and so on. So he did not shy away from the issues that they have with China, but he made it clear that this is a country that they needed to be engaged with, rather than just thinking of them as an adversary. And he also talked about plans that NATO have for investing in the developing world, perhaps as a kind of a way of counteracting China's investment and influence there with its Belt and Road Initiative.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.